Here with John Lepo from Red Hat. We were just talking about different models and model behavior. And I want to say, I just recently switched to Claude because I think it's far more intelligent than ChatGPT currently. Give it 6 months, I may flip. But Claude project skills, I absolutely love it. But I do love advanced voice in ChatGPT, either for translating or for just conversing with. And I was having a conversation with it this morning before you and I met, and I was asking it to break down to data questions that you might bring up to an 8th grade business class, and it had these really silly examples. And then I was like, well, what about ETL or ELT? And it was kind of like, oh, so if you want to go that deep with the kids. And then I said, what about vector database? And she was like, well, if you want to be able to go home and impress their parents and their friends with some words, maybe that's cool. And I said, every time I bring that up with my parents or friends, they roll their eyes. They're not too impressed. And ChatGPT said, well, you do run the risk of a few eye rolls when you get overly nerdy, Jason. And so like a little bit of
Yeah.
personality there is kind of fun, right? But
No,
I
yeah.
totally get with you. Like my go-to if a model won't do something is to go to Grok, because Grok's kind of like Mikey from the Life cereal commercial. He'll eat anything. Like Grok will do anything you ask it to. It doesn't seem to have much of an ethical compass to it. But dive back into how that plays out, especially in the business world, because it's all fun and games if you're just sticking around at home. But in business, this can have some serious consequences.
No, and I think that's a really great point. And so there's kind of one example I can think of. Might not be the tightest to general business use cases, but we were putting together a workflow for a startup company in manufacturing. And there's one of the goals of Palantir is to sort of open up the DoD so that everyone can sort of compete for these different programs of record. Sham Sankar, CTO of Palantir, his thesis was that there's 5-ish companies that do all the contracting for the DoD, and that if we lose one of them, we no longer can build F-16s. Each of those 5 companies are considered or are comprised of 140 member companies, and they do everything from make golf carts to actuation systems for fighter jets to some of them will even do the emergency power for commercial airlines, right? And so if any of these 5 companies have a serious situation, we lose a massive part of our manufacturing base, what's left of it. And we lose our ability to compete as a military power. And so there's a few flows like within that space that are kind of important. Some of them are around like supply chain. So making sure that you can find the right part. Very good AI shaped problem. Some of them could be around actually like going through like massive swaths of data and finding parts and all the different parts that those touch. And then you start to kind of talk with structured versus unstructured data, right? Like how are you tying these data points together? Do you have an anonymizing layer? Are you like tapping on actual data that's DoD classified versus unclassified data? And then you also have the ETL versus ELT conversation, and where that data is being stored and how secure it is, as either security flaw or security add-on, intentionally or unintentionally. But you can position these workflows so that they're very powerful and do a lot of really painful and tedious tasks that your manufacturing team has to do. So I guess to bring it full circle, the way that you would want to allow these other companies to compete, these smaller manufacturing companies to compete for these DoD contracts and come up with some truly amazing stuff, like your Andurils of the world, you would have to position them so that they can kind of do more with less, right? You need a force multiplier in there. So if you were to take like a minor part malfunction or say a supply delivery that was like short, I mean, it could take someone an entire day at messing with Excel, and I'm talking crazy complicated Excels that took years to make. It could take someone an entire day to figure out how to work around that one part that's missing. Whereas with AI, you could do it in theory in like 5 minutes, right? And so important for Boeing and Lockheed, but even more important for your little guys, your Andurils and your Shield AIs of the world. Um, well, so you need to have an LLM that is willing to do that work, right? Um, and what we found very early on when we were designing these workflows a couple of years ago is that there were some that weren't willing to do that work. Kind of talking about the cold call conversation earlier, with Gemini not wanting to make a cold call script because it was against its ethical barriers. Um, Now, it wasn't really against its ethical barriers. It was like a prompting issue. But now you go back and say, okay, which of these LLMs are we allowed to use for manufacturing? Okay, we've got this subset. Are we allowed to use them for military manufacturing? Okay, now we have none. You know,
Yeah.
because it's a philosophical conversation. It's like this language model, this tool cannot be used to hurt another human. Well, making a drone isn't necessarily hurting a human, you
It
know?
could be saving a human.
And that's the Anduril and Raytheon kind of counter argument, which we can get into on the next one if you
Yeah.
like.
Oh, I think that this is a perfect play because you talked about how AI can be a strength for the smaller players and can democratize things. And that was kind of my first fall in love with AI was that it was language based, which I've come to find out really isn't true. It still breaks it down into ones and zeros at the end, and you still have to understand a little bit of all that. But my second love was the fact that it can help me understand this data layer, but that layer is super important, and that's where I want to start getting into some of these conversations around how to effectively use large language models and machine learning in collaboration with each other by leveraging your data. And that's going to be a great conversation.